I'd like to talk about some of the common problems we come across when people are fitting up machines to tractors for the first time. The first one we'll look at is the hose connections. It's very important, of course, to have the supply hose into the supply port and the return hose into the return port. If you happen to mix them up, probably the most common thing that will happen is the hammer will raise up by itself as soon as you turn the hydraulics on without using any of the functions. It's normally a good indication that the hoses are either in back the front, or it may be that the return hose to the tractor is blocked or restricted in some way. It can't get rid of the oil quick enough. The next problem we're going to talk about is oil pressure. This machine is not going to operate properly if the oil pressure is too low. Unfortunately for this check, you need some specialised equipment like a pressure gauge, but there are some checks that you can do yourself to see if there is a low oil pressure problem present. One of the symptoms of low oil pressure, I'll just demonstrate now with the post. When we drop the anvil down onto the post, the anvil has a certain amount of free travel there. We use the auger feed to drop the anvil onto the post. The anvil will move up into the hammer. When we operate the hammer function, the anvil is not going to travel up the extra inch it needs to get the hammer to fire. It could be a low oil pressure problem, or it may just be the fact that the downforce tap is screwed all the way out and we're not putting enough pressure down onto the anvil to activate the piston in the hammer. If the downforce tap is screwed all the way in and we operate the hammer control on, the anvil doesn't move up any further into the hammer, like so, most likely cause will be a low oil pressure problem. The best and only way we can check for low oil pressure is to put a gauge in the line. So we need to install the pressure tester into the supply hose. Next we need to start the tractor up, get the hydraulics running, and then we need to deadhead one of the functions. So normally I'll just run the hammer to the top of its stroke, keep the hammer handle engaged, and check what reading we have on the gauge. So we can see there we've got almost 2,200 psi pressure. So the pressure reading we're looking for should be no lower than 2,000 psi, and ultimately to get the machine to perform at its optimum, you're looking at 2,500 psi. So if you can't achieve a pressure of at least 2,000 psi, there's a fair chance that the problem could be somewhere back here at the tractor. The other thing we need to look at as far as oil is concerned is the oil flow. If we have too low oil flow, the hammer won't start. If we have too high oil flow, things can happen like overheating. It could blow hoses out of the tractor connections on the tractor. So we need to make sure that the oil flow is right for your tractor. It's a simple test we can do to determine that. We can mark a line onto the auger shaft, and now we can run the auger at full speed and count the amount of turns it does per minute. So for a 730 hammer, we're looking at somewhere around about 120 turns per minute of the auger shaft. For a 900 hammer, it's going to be up around about 180 turns per minute. So I can see there that this is running too slow, therefore it has low oil flow. I can increase the tractor revs and you'll see that the speed on the auger increases. Once you determine the right speed for the auger, then that's the speed you'll need to run your tractor or your PDO at to give correct flow for this machine. I'll just demonstrate one of the problems that low oil flow can cause. When the anvil's lowered down onto the post, you can see the anvil moves up, takes up the free travel. When the hammer function is operated, the anvil moves up further into the hammer. When the anvil moves up to a point, if it clunks and doesn't hammer any further, that's an indication that there's not enough oil flow present. The next thing we'll talk about is instability of the machine. If everything's not set up correctly, when you're trying to drive a post, the machine may become unstable. So we'll just run through some of those things that will cause that. The first thing to look at is the height of the feet on the post driver, and the 2 feet on the side shift need to be set in the correct positions. The next thing, we need to get the top link adjusted correctly between the side shift and the tractor. If it's not adjusted correctly, when we use the hammer function, this foot will try and push into the ground. The two side shift feet will come off the ground and the machine will become unstable. So another method we can use to help steady its sideways movement, we can lengthen this arm here, which will put more pressure downwards on the lower link arm. That will tend to offset some of the weight that's created by the machine being side shifted right out to one side. One of the biggest problems we come across with stability problems is in relation to the draft control system. If the draft control system is left on, what will happen when we start driving a post, this link will push forwards, it'll trigger a sensor, and that sensor will cause the lower link arms to lift the whole side shifting machine up off the ground, when actually what we're trying to do is keep the machine down on the ground. So it's very important that your draft control is deactivated, disabled, switched off, whatever. It's probably one of the most simplest things to fix. It's one of the most common problems we come across. Another thing that can affect the stability of the machine is the downforce system. Of course, we put that there so as we can keep all this machine down on the ground and use some of the tractor weight to hold it on the ground. It's important that that's set up correctly. The linkages, where they pivot from, the pivot points, on different tractors, those pivot points will be different distances away from each other, and that'll affect how good the downforce system works. The best thing we can do is to make sure that the top link is up into the highest hole possible, to keep it as far away from this pivot point as we can. If you still have a problem with the machine lifting off the ground, then it's time to use the downforce tap on the machine to put less downforce onto the post to keep everything nice and stable out at the post driver.